When does firing missiles break a ceasefire? Not yet, according to President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Trump's revenge test: will incumbents in Indiana pay the political price for refusing the president's redistricting request? Primary voting is underway in Georgia. We talked to a Republican, now turned Democrat, about the race for governor. Hello, I'm Weijia Jiang in for Major Garrett. Welcome to the Takeout. The war against Iran has led us to question the definition of some seemingly straightforward terms. An example: what is considered war? And can a war be paused? Today's question: are we still in a ceasefire? In the past few days, Iran has fired several times on both U.S. ships and ships from the United Arab Emirates. Some might consider these acts of aggression as a breaking of the ceasefire. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said this when asked.
So right now, the ceasefire certainly holds, but we're going to be watching very, very closely.
Both Iran and the U.S. claim to control the Strait of Hormuz. The White House says they will be escorting ships through it, but it largely remains closed. No ships making the journey today. President Trump says Iran still wants to make a deal, but they are, quote, playing games. Asked what they could do to violate the ceasefire, Trump said he would let us know and added this.
They know what to do and they know what to do. They know what not to do, more importantly, actually.
What exactly that is remains a mystery. Late today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the initial phase of the war, dubbed Operation Epic Fury, is over. He described this latest phase, called Project Freedom, in the following terms.
You hear stories about attacks and launching of firing back and forth. It's not back and forth. We are only responding if attacked first. This is a defensive operation.
Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes leads us off to help us sort through the administration's strategy. Nancy, great to see you. So if Operation Epic Fury is over, does that mean the administration is saying the goals of that operation have all been accomplished?
Not at all, Weijia. In fact, listening to Secretary of State Marco Rubio today, you got the distinct impression that when it comes to their goals of rendering Iran a non-nuclear state, they're really at the very beginning. Remember, it was just about 2.5 weeks ago when President Trump told you that Iran had agreed to nearly everything and that the U.S. and Iran were going to be working together to remove enriched uranium from underground. Well, Rubio made no mention of that today. In fact, he said that when it comes to the negotiations, the goal right now is just to come up with some level of understanding about what are the topics that Iran has agreed even to negotiate on. So it sounded as if Iran hasn't even fully agreed to discuss its nuclear program. So a very different message coming from the Secretary of State in that briefing room than the very optimistic notes that the president has been striking.
Well, President Trump continues to issue some threats toward Iran. He said earlier today that Iran knows what not to do. What else did he say that really stood out to you?
Well, he claimed that Iran really needs and wants to make a deal. He said that that's what he's hearing from Iran behind the scenes. He also insisted, as his Secretary of Defense did earlier in the day, Weijia, that the U.S. has full and total control over the strait. Now, how that squares with the fact that, as you pointed out, the Iranian military is still firing missiles and drones at U.S. Navy warships, at the UAE, how that squares with the fact that no commercial vessels were able to transit through the strait today, even though it is the second day of this new phase, Project Freedom, whereby the U.S. is marshaling tremendous resources to escort commercial vessels through the strait. It's hard to square that claim that that the U.S. somehow has full control over the strait. But that's something that the president has said repeatedly as he insists that the blockade is working.
Nancy Cordes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Vice President J.D. Vance is spending this evening in Iowa. He's stumping for Republican Congressman Zach Nunn in Des Moines. Nunn's seat is one that Democrats are eyeing as a potential flip in November. And that is exactly where we find our Ed O'Keefe. And it's great to see you. You know, Iran is the talk of the town here in Washington, but I wonder if that's the case in America's heartland and whether the vice president will weave that into his speech tonight.
Well, Weege, it's very good to see you. We are awaiting the vice president's arrival. He's just landed in the Hawkeye State a little while ago on a full day of stops in the Midwest. He voted this morning in his home state of Ohio ahead of the primary there, was at a fundraiser in Oklahoma City, and is coming here to a congressional district that is very much on the minds of both parties as they fight over control of the House. And when you talk to people in this state, at the gas pump or out on their farms, yes, Iran is very much on their minds because the cost of things has gone up since late February when the war began. Take, for example, Aaron Lehman, who's a farmer up in Polk City, about 20, 30 minutes outside of Des Moines. We talked about the fact that prices have spiked for things like fertilizer and diesel, and that's rubbing off on all sorts of other parts of the Iowa economy, including manufacturing companies like this one. Listen to what Aaron had to tell us. So when this White House says it's the best friend a farmer has ever had, you say?
That doesn't say much about my friends, because people are out here hurting. You know, the rhetoric about a golden age of agriculture right around the corner, that doesn't match the reality of what's going on the ground at all.
So if the president or the vice president picked up the phone and said, Aaron, what do we need to be doing differently, what would you tell them?
Well, right now we're trying to pass a farm bill, but the version that came out of the House does not match the circumstances we're under. Not for costs, not for the challenges farmers are facing, not for the challenges that our consumers are facing. It is outdated before it even gets passed. So pass a farm bill that reflects current conditions.
We are expecting the vice president to talk a bit about what it is the administration is doing to help farmers and manufacturing companies in this state when he speaks in a little bit. But based on our conversation with Aaron, he's got a lot of convincing to do, Ouija.
And yet, of course, those issues, along with costs in general, are big concerns in Indiana and Ohio, where it is primary day. Republicans there who defied Trump on redistricting are now facing MAGA challengers. So lay out what you expect to see from there tonight.
So when the Indiana Republicans were approached about redistricting in the Hoosier state, about 40 state lawmakers told the White House they were not on board with doing so based on conversations essentially with their constituents who said, we only do this every 10 years, we're not going to do it now. 8 of those 40 are on the ballot today in primaries, and they're being challenged by candidates backed by the White House and Trump-aligned groups spending millions of dollars against them in what would otherwise be sleepy contests. One of those state senators who told the White House no is Spencer Deary. Listen to why he said redistricting is something they shouldn't do in Indiana. Take us back to when the White House first broached the idea of having legislators in Indiana redraw the map, and what their argument was, and why you ultimately decided you just couldn't support that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the reasons why they wanted us to. I mean, I, too, want to maintain a Republican congressional majority. But ultimately, I don't work for them. I work for my constituents, and also I work for the state of Indiana. And so as I started to look into it, the first thing that set off alarm bells for me is recognizing that really no party, Republican or Democrat, has ever systematically attempted to redraw the maps midterm like this, mid-cycle. And if we start doing that as a country, it takes power from the people and gives it to the government to be able to shield themselves from accountability. And that was a big concern as a constitutional conservative. But I also started to hear from my constituents that it wasn't really something they wanted me to do.
They have spent millions of dollars, at least $6 million, on these 8 state Senate primaries today, Ouija, and it's gotten a bit personal, as State Senator Deary told us. Take a listen. When you put yourself in opposition to the president, you said you were getting robocalls, or your constituents were getting robocalls. There's been millions of dollars in attack ads, both on the air and digitally. But my understanding is that the attacks or the threats against you and your family have been far more intense.
Well, we were a series of lawmakers were swatted or attempted at swatting. Fortunately for myself, I wasn't one of the first, and so we had the protocols in place to be able to make sure it wasn't law enforcement kicking down the door. But there certainly have been a few death threats, and that are something that I had never had in my years as a state senate. Really, this whole process has felt like Washington, D.C. coming to Indiana in terms of the politics and some of the culture of there. And, typically when Hoosiers run for federal office, they say, we want to take Indiana to D.C., an Indiana way of doing business in D.C. This has felt like D.C. trying to come to Indiana to force D.C. upon Indiana.
And the president weighed in just a little while ago on Truth Social, we just saying that good luck to those great Indiana Senate candidates who are running against people who couldn't care less about our country or about keeping the majority in Congress. There are a handful of contests across the country tonight. The president and his team are most definitely keeping an eye on those 8 contests in Indiana.
And so will you be. Thank you so much, Ed O'Keefe. Returning back to the war with Iran, the aid organization Mercy Corps is warning the conflict will have devastating consequences for nations already on the brink of a humanitarian crisis. Some of those countries are Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia, Pakistan, Myanmar, and Lebanon. Kate Phillips-Barrasso joins me now. She is the Vice President for Global Policy and Advocacy at Mercy Corps. Kate, it is so great to be with you. So Mercy Corps highlighted these 6 countries. Tell us more about your biggest concerns. What could happen now that the war is continuing?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked this question, because often when people are thinking about the war, they're of course thinking about the Middle East, where all of the action is happening. But the impacts of the war, much like you heard on the previous segment, are traveling around the world through fuel and fertilizer prices, which cascade through the economy and end up being paid by people. And when those people are already on the brink of insolvency, they don't have a lot of resources, or they may already be actively affected by a humanitarian crisis, like in Sudan, like in Somalia, there are simply no margins for them to absorb these shocks. So we are really concerned that these dramatic increases in fuel and fertilizer prices are going to have a dramatic impact on food insecurity around the world. And as the World Food Program has said, an estimated by 45 million additional people worldwide will fall into hunger by the end of this year. And we are afraid that there just simply won't be enough humanitarian assistance to meet this moment of crisis generated by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
And can you talk more about how the lockdown of the Strait of Hormuz, even though there seems to be a lot of efforts to reopen it, but how is the current situation contributing to the lack of resources getting really all over the place?
Absolutely. Well, a lot of the world's fertilizer actually travels through urea, which is a nitrogen-based fertilizer, is used in the majority of the world's agriculture. And we are actually heading into the planting season in countries like Sudan, Somalia, Pakistan. I actually was just in Sudan, and they were preparing the ground for tilling and for their rain-fed agriculture this summer. But if fertilizer prices are really high, because very little is getting through the strait right now, they will plant less crop, or they will have a less productive yield. And that basically means when they come to harvest in the fall, that there will be dramatically less food in an environment where we already had 20 million people who were food insecure. The same goes for fuel prices, right? That obviously makes things painful at the pump, but it also cascades into the economy because it makes food prices higher. It makes the price of, frankly, everything in life higher. And again, if you're someone who's spending already 70% of your income on food, you just don't have the margins to be able to span that delta. And so this is what will tip families who are either in countries that have had significant inflation in recent years, like Pakistan, or are actively involved in a conflict like in Sudan, fall deeper into humanitarian need. And that may be a dramatic impact that we see come out of this crisis in the Strait. Right now, we're feeling it, but we fear that as the year goes on, that will become more and more acute.
So Mercy Corps and other groups, other countries, obviously cannot push a button to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly.
What can you do to help people in these countries?
Well, one of the things that we're doing, of course, is trying to raise awareness of this issue. Again, people don't realize, of course, this is hitting us here at home, but imagine, if you were in the situation I just described, how much the impact of these price hikes would have. We are also encouraging international donors, which I should also note have been dramatically cutting their assistance levels, and that includes the United States and European donor countries over the last year, to obviously reverse that and actually try to pre-position assistance now before people end up in situations of famine. We're also trying to encourage different donors to pre-position fertilizer and supplies before this critical window closes, before the summer, to assist farmers in some of the poorest countries around the world so that they can actually have an adequate harvest and we don't see those 45 million additional people fall into need. But these are moves that need to be made fast. The window is closing on the planting season, and we are seeing those donor signs really continue to drop. There just is not that much available humanitarian assistance given the rising need.
We certainly understand the need, and we appreciate you helping us to process the dire situation that is unfolding right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
White House border czar Tom Homan sat down for an exclusive interview with CBS News immigration correspondent Camilo Montoyo Galvez today to defend the Trump administration's deportation efforts. And Camilo joins me now. It's great to see you, as always. Walk us through your conversation today with Tom Homan.
Hi, Ouija. Well, as you know, Tom Homan is one of the leading figures in President Trump's aggressive crackdown on illegal immigration. And following that fatal shooting of ICU nurse and U.S. citizen Alex Preddy in Minneapolis, President Trump sent Homan to that city in Minnesota to de-escalate tensions there and to wind down that aggressive operation known as Operation Metro Surge. And we decided to talk to him about that course correction, if you will, that we have seen ICE undertake in recent months. Here's some of what he told us. Do you believe, sir, that this administration's policy is still one of mass deportation? And I ask you that because since Minneapolis, we're no longer seeing near daily videos of ICE arresting people or ICE on the headlines every single day. Has the administration backed down to some degree?
No. We're just doing things the right way.
What does that mean?
Well, the President made a promise to American people of mass deportations. I'm overseeing that along with Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen. The numbers have dipped slightly, I think 12%. Because of why? Because the government's shut down. I mean, ICE agents may be getting paid, but our contractors aren't. The people who do the targeting, people who do all that work to make it possible to go look for people, right? So that's part of the problem. The other problem is at Minnesota. Look, the president, I didn't ask to go to Minnesota. The president called me up and told me to go to Minnesota to address a problem, to de-escalate, and do what we do best, which is target enforcement operations. And when I got to Minneapolis, I was clear during my speeches there, things weren't perfect. I addressed some things, we fixed some things, and what happened after Minneapolis? We had unprecedented support from county jails across the state that we didn't have before, which means we got the bad guy in the safety and security of a jail, which means we didn't have to go to the street to find him, right? So you send a whole team of 6 or 7 guys to go find this person, and things were so elevated, the hate and the violence was so elevated, now we got to send a security team to back up the Fuge Ops team. So while they're busy trying to arrest this guy, now you got to have another security team keeping their back safe. So now you got 13 guys arrest that one person. That alone causes a lot of the conflict when people see, the large groups of agents out doing this job, when we simply could have had one agent arrest one bad guy in the jail, right? So I met with the governor. I met with the attorney general. I met with the mayor. And
to de-escalate.
To say, look, there's a better way to do this. Cooperate with us.
And Ouija, you may recall that Homan essentially replaced that controversial Border Patrol commander, Gregory Vivino. He has since retired, but Vivino recently told an outlet that the administration is now taking a softer approach on immigration enforcement. He is alleging that Homan and other administration officials are backing down from that mass deportation promise that as you know, helped return President Trump to the White House. But Homan denied that, saying that it's a smarter approach to immigration enforcement. Ouija.
Camila Montoya Galvez, thank you for all your reporting. Still to come on the Takeout, to push on Capitol Hill to create term limits for Supreme Court justices. Maryland Democratic Congressman Johnny Olszewski joins me live to discuss his new legislation. Also, can Georgia's former Republican lieutenant governor win as a Democrat? Jeff Duncan joins me live to talk about his campaign for governor. Plus, 7 contenders for California governor meet on the debate stage yet again tomorrow night. That includes Democrat Katie Porter, whose latest ad calls back to one of the most infamous moments of her campaign. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Recent polling released by NBC News shows only 22% of Americans have confidence in the U.S. Supreme Court. In the wake of that growing unpopularity, a new proposal in Congress would amend the Constitution to implement 18-year term limits on Supreme Court justices. Other similar proposals have failed to gain traction in Congress throughout the years. Maryland Democratic Congressman Johnny Olszewski joins me now. He is the lawmaker proposing this bill. Congressman, it's so great to see you in my old stomping grounds. What makes your proposal different from past attempts, I wonder, to implement term limits?
Thanks, Ouija. It's great to be with you. And what I will say is this is a very straightforward constitutional amendment to really address that confidence crisis that we're facing with the Supreme Court right now. This is a proposal that will cap all terms to 18 years, something that is overwhelmingly supported not just by Americans, but by Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike. It's something that I hope that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will step forward and address, given the upending of decades of precedents, given the ethical concerns that we've seen with the Supreme Court, and given the political gamesmanship that we've seen with and around appointments.
And Congressman, given what we just heard about that low percentage of Americans who have confidence in the U.S. Supreme Court, do you think that there's a bigger appetite from the public to have more term limits right now?
Yeah, I hear overwhelmingly from my constituents, I think especially around the Supreme Court, a desire to see term limits. I know that term limits are widely supported generally, something I support personally in other cases as well. But what I can say is, in the case of Congress, I personally have to stand before the voters every 2 years to justify returning to the United States Congress. And I think the voters in November will send a resounding message that they are not supportive of the Republican policies and practices that this Congress has enacted. Unfortunately, we don't have that possibility with the Supreme Court. And so when they gut a woman's right to choose, when they undo decades of hard-fought civil rights gains, there's nothing that the American people can do. And it's especially frustrating when you see these justices rubbing shoulders with the president at state dinners, going on Fox News, and also taking lavish trips with individuals who have business before the court. I think it's important that we act, and this is a common sense, straightforward way to address those concerns.
But what about among your colleagues in Congress? Do you see a realistic path of support for this or any other similar reform for the high court?
Yeah, I mean, ethics reform for the court, not just having a code of ethics, but actually something that's enforceable, I think is really important too. And what I will say is, I know that constitutional amendments as a former American government teacher are very hard to pass. But what I will say is this is just far too important for us not to try. I've already heard from several members of Congress who are following up with our office and joining this constitutional amendment now that it's been introduced. I look forward to working with my colleagues, again, on both sides of the aisle. This is not meant to be a partisan reform. This is really addressing that confidence crisis that's out there that you pointed out at the top with the public polling and the lack of confidence in the Supreme Court.
And Congressman, I want to shift to funding for the Secret Service because Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee are pushing to include $1 billion for the service into its planned reconciliation package to fund ICE and CBP. It would fund security adjustments and upgrades at the White House, including for the East Wing Ballroom. Do you support the inclusion of those additional funds?
I support funding the Secret Service, just as I supported efforts to make sure that we opened up the rest of Homeland Security. The bill that we ultimately passed last week, that was passed twice by the Senate through unanimous consent and was supported by the president. I will not give a dime for ICE without reforms. And I led a law enforcement agency as Baltimore County executive before coming to Congress, and we had common sense reforms. We had body-worn cameras. We did de-escalation. We didn't conduct police activities in sensitive locations like schools and churches. I can't even get my Republican colleagues to agree to not deport American citizens. And so I'm open to the conversations of funding other agencies, but not a penny without those reforms that I think are so necessary. And again, also overwhelmingly supported by the American people.
Understood. Thank you, Congressman. And before I let you go, since you do sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, some of your fellow Democrats have called for Trump administration officials, including Secretary of State Rubio, to testify about the U.S. strategy toward Iran. Is that something you want to hear from the administration as well? And are there any hearings planned?
I absolutely want to see Secretary Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner come before the Foreign Affairs Committee and talk about what is the strategy for ending this war? What is the diplomatic approach to how that we actually stop Iran from becoming a nuclear armed country? How do we take our troops out of harm's way? How do we stop the tens of billions of dollars of cost to the taxpayer? We know that we are paying for this with lives lost through our troops at the gas pump and through surcharges on things like Amazon. We're paying for it with the billions of dollars being asked for. And it's really astonishing to me that as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, there has not been a single public hearing with any of the administration officials. One of the most important things that's happening, not just in America, but the world. And they can't be bothered to have a conversation with us and with the American people. I think it speaks to a lack of respect, both to Congress, but also to Americans, not just here, but unfortunately something we're seeing in other places as well.
All right, Congressman Johnny Olszewski, thank you for so much of your time today.
My pleasure.
To Georgia and check in on the Democratic primary for governor. I'll speak with one of the candidates, Jeff Duncan, next. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. The second week of early voting in Georgia is underway, and state officials are touting record numbers. The first 7 days of early voting saw more than 214,000 Georgians cast ballots. That is a 28% increase from 2022. Former Republican Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, joins me now. He is now running for governor, but as a Democrat. Great to see you, Lieutenant Governor. The DOJ, as you know, is seeking the names of people who worked in the 2020 election in Fulton County. Just a few hours ago, I saw you posted on social media about that. You also issued a related warning about the Trump administration. Can you talk about what your concerns are?
Yeah, Donald Trump has been trying to legal elections for years now, and it's unfortunate. Obviously, I stood up in the heat of the moment alongside several others when Donald Trump tried to literally steal the election in 2020. And we saw additional signs of those attempts when they raided the FBI, raided the Fulton County elections warehouse a few months ago. That had nothing to do with the 2020 election. It has everything to do with sowing seeds of doubt in these upcoming midterms. And my advice to Republicans are, if they want to win an election, then just govern better. Focus on the issues that matter the most: the affordability crisis, the healthcare crisis. Those are things that real people in Georgia need solved. Those are the problems that they want addressed. And Donald Trump's attempts and watching them try to get these names of these poll workers is, once again, just like these ICE raids, all about fear and intimidation. That's the only thing Donald Trump knows. And we've got to have folks in power that stand up and call it for what it is, and it's nothing but fear and intimidation.
I know that you will probably tell me you don't pay much attention to the polls, but the early ones have Keisha Lance Bottoms with an edge. How do you assess the state of your campaign right now?
Well, Georgia is one of those states where you got to get 50+1. So totally expected. Keisha Lance Bottoms has high name ID as the former mayor of Atlanta. And so round one is the top two get to go to the runoff. And I feel like we're positioned well enough to get to that runoff and to really put the case forward that we are the best candidate for the first time in nearly 30 years for a Democrat to beat a Republican here in Georgia. And make no mistake about it, the Republicans are running to look and smell exactly like Donald Trump. And I feel like a majority of Georgians realize that's a huge mistake. My campaign has been focused since day one. Obviously, I have an interesting story. I used to be the Republican lieutenant governor, but I wake up as a proud Democrat every day now with a better toolkit than I've ever had. And my focus is to try to win this election by building a coalition of Democrats, independents, and yes, this gift called even disgusted Republicans that are going to show up and vote for not only me, but other Democrats. And to do it, I'm staying focused on the three issues that everybody's worried about, including Republicans: the affordability crisis, the healthcare crisis, and the Donald Trump crisis. I feel like that meets a majority of Georgians where they're at. That really speaks to the momentum that we're continuing to gain.
And speaking of name recognition, she is also touting the endorsement from former President Biden. Is that a good or a bad thing for you?
I guess we'll find out on May 19th. I'm touting the fact that I've got Senator Freddie Powell Sims, I've got Senator Donzella James, I've got Georgia Men for Democracy Now!, I've got James Woodall, past president of the NAACP. These folks don't only endorse me, but they're on a commercial that launched yesterday here in Georgia. And you can see more of it at duncanforgeorgia.com.
And I hear you about affordability issues, the main concerns that people across this country have. But I wonder what you say to voters who might be confused about where you stand on issues like access to abortion and gun control, since you have switched parties from the Republican to Democrats.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, more importantly than the party switch, has been the eye-opening experience around specific issues. I now wake up with better visibility into the gun issue. The NRA has nobody's best interest at heart but their own. And I believe 90% of Georgians and Americans know what they're talking about with universal background checks, red flag laws, and in-home safe storage laws. Even a majority of Republicans agree with that. Same with Medicaid expansion. And the heartbeat bill here in Georgia, which is a 6-week ban on abortion, I was wrong to think that room full of state senators knew better than millions of women. And day one as governor, I promise every room I walk into, with all the sincerity and conviction in the world, that I'll sign an executive order day one that clarifies doctors can practice medicine without fear of prosecution, which has become a huge issue. And secondly, we'll introduce the legislation to repeal the 6-week ban and do the right thing.
Thank you so much for your time, former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. We will be watching your race very closely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, new polling on the upcoming Republican runoff for Senate in Texas. Our political panel weighs in on the state of the contest between John Cornyn and Ken Paxton. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Katie Porter's campaign for California governor got off to a rough start last year after a video surfaced of her telling a staffer to, quote, get out of her effing shot while she was recording a video. The former Democratic congresswoman is now using that in her new ad campaign. Take a listen.
To give Californians what they need, it's going to take standing up to Donald Trump, calling out greedy corporations, and stepping on some toes along the way. Now, could you guys please get out of my shot?
Let's bring in our political panel, Republican strategist Megan Mobbs and Democratic strategist Matt Bennett. Matt, it seems like Katie Porter is trying to own up to it a little bit. Is that going to work?
I don't think so. Look, first of all, I'm all for self-deprecating humor. It's a pretty good attempt. But I think in politics, when you're explaining, you're losing, and she's doing some explaining there. Look, I don't think voters really care how politicians treat their staff. The most prominent politician in America treats his staff pretty badly at the moment. So you can get elected to high office being rough on your team. But I think it just it underscores some unease that people have with Katie Porter about a number of things. So maybe a good effort, but I don't think it's going to work.
And if it's not the ads that they're going to be watching tonight, what are people going to be watching for on both sides?
Well, I would just say there's a difference, I think, between being kind of rough on staff and having standards and then just being outright mean. And I think what this showed here was just a sense of meanness. And really, really hope for is that American people are going to be paying attention to things like that, taking that into consideration, because I don't think that most people want meanness anywhere. I think people do want to get back a little bit to kind of cooler heads, calm policy, and things that are going to right the ship. So I think there is a difference there between being mean and being tough on staffers.
And what about what Republicans have to do tonight? Because The Democratic field has not coalesced yet. How do you see them taking advantage tonight?
I mean, I think this is where we really have to coalesce around really things I think that voters are interested in, and the policies that clearly got the president into office. Things like secure borders, being tough on crime. I mean, quite frankly, we're going to have the conversation around the economy. But I do think that's where we have to focus on the things that the American public wanted the president to deliver. They did deliver. I do think that's why you're seeing some of these kind of tough primaries in Texas, for example, because they do want the president's agenda. So they do have to coalesce around those successful things, I think, in order to be successful. And I think, unfortunately, right now, the Democrats are a little bit out there trying to find that winning messaging.
And I want to jump down to Texas now, because we have some new polling that shows Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is slightly ahead of incumbent Senator John Cornyn in that Republican primary runoff. Of course, President Trump has yet to endorse either one of them. I wonder, Matt, does that say anything about Democrats, or is this strictly, something that we should be watching in party, in the GOP?
I think it matters enormously who wins this primary, because if Ken Paxton wins, that's going to be a very competitive race. James Talarico is a strong candidate. Texas is super tough for Democrats. I don't want to overstate how easy it'll be to even be competitive there. It'll be really hard. But I think even if we can't win there, and we might, Republicans are going to have to spend a lot of money to fend off the Democrats in a state that should be easy for them to win if Paxton is the nominee. If Cornyn is the nominee, is the incumbent, that makes it much tougher on Democrats. So I'm not rooting for Ken Paxton. I don't want him in the U.S. Senate, but I will say it'll make a very different race if he's the nominee.
And what do you think, Megan?
So I think in general, I love a fierce primary. I think this is the right thing. I think President not endorsing someone early is a good thing, because at the end of the day, we're going to have to coalesce around whoever the nominee is, because it could potentially be a tough race. And so for me, I'm always about this kind of rough primaries. I want them to fight it out. And then at the end of the day, us rallying around whoever the candidate is going to be.
And earlier in the show, we did talk about term limits for the Supreme Court. I want to play just a little bit of what my colleague Jan Crawford talked to Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch about, and then pick your brains.
The president is constantly taking shots at the court. The other day, he said, you're showing very little loyalty to the man who appointed the three of you. I mean, does a justice owe a president loyalty?
No. My loyalty is the Constitution and laws of the United States. That's the oath I took. And so do I care people say left, right, center about me? Nah.
Megan, do you think that the president has changed, at the very least, the perception that the American public has when it comes to the court and their complete separation from the White House?
I mean, I think this is a perfect example of not, right? I mean, this is one of the most wonderful things about our country. And what I'd say, you have the president coming out and saying what he said, and then the very next day, or almost the next day, you have the Supreme Court justice that he is speaking about coming out and saying that he's going to do his job, that he is going to apply the Constitution as it is written, which is what I want to happen, and he's going to do so without fear of any type of reprisal. And that's what makes our country fantastic. Every president, and there's been leaders, I mean, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries had some things to say about the Supreme Court just a couple of weeks ago. He called it corrupt. He called it illegitimate. So this happens. What I don't want to happen is a focus on just saying, the president has done this, therefore this is bad and authoritarian, when both sides of the aisle have done it. And quite frankly, the ability of the Supreme Court justice to come out, say it, do his job is exactly what makes our country so amazing and our institutions so strong.
Matt, are comments like that from Justice Gorsuch enough to convince the public that there is, in fact, a separation that there's supposed to be?
No, I don't think so. I mean, what matters most is how they rule in important cases. And so far, this court has been very amenable to many of the things that this president has done that many of us think are terrible and unconstitutional and illegal. So it is going to take, the proof will be in the pudding. It's good that Justice Gorsuch said that. He had to say that. It would be insane if he didn't. And what Trump said is very indicative of how he thinks about the role of the court in American system, which is completely perverted. But what matters most is how they rule. They've given him immunity. They've done all kinds of things that have suggested that they're bending the knee to him as well.
I'm sorry if this is whiplash, but we do have a little more time. And since it is primary day in Ohio and Indiana, is there anything that either of you are watching?
Well, I mean, I think that this is what we're kind of saying all along. I'm watching here basically what the primary voters are looking for in all of the different candidates. And I would say that there's been some commentary about there kind of being like, a retribution tour that's happening. And I would just simply say that the reality is when you have the head of a party establishing priorities, especially around certain things, there is the expectation on some level that they follow through with those priorities. And so what I'm looking for is just that. Really, where is the primary base lying? What are they looking for? Because that is obviously going to drive into the midterms and then, quite frankly, into 2028.
I mean, just to be clear, what's happening, and the president's been very clear about this, is he's trying to knock off state legislators who didn't go along with his redistricting plan. These are guys that are good conservatives that support the president, and he's going after them anyway. I don't think that's how the system's supposed to work, and I don't think they think that either.
Oh, I think that's party politics. I would say that happens on both sides.
Well, we shall see in just a few hours how it turns out. Megan Mobbs and Matt Bennett, thank you both. Next, Major Garrett wraps up the show with our CBS News radio flashback. Tonight's clip, the closure of Studio 9, where some of radio's earliest and most famed voices broadcasted from. You're watching The Takeout.
Now for our CBS radio clip of fame. I'm going to guess almost none of you have ever heard of Studio 9. Until I started wading through the archives of CBS News Radio, I hadn't heard of it either. Studio 9, though, it is no exaggeration to say, was the birthplace of CBS News. The studio from which voices that made CBS News on the radio famous came from Studio 9. It was a place that began knitting the world together via reportage over radio waves. Now, Studio 9 was due to close in the summer of 1964. And correspondent Robert Trout, a voice I hope you have become familiar with in these tributes, organized a farewell. And here is how it began.
The voices of Studio 9. Edward R. Murrow on a London rooftop during the Blitz.
This is London. I'm standing again tonight looking out over London. In the course of the last 15 or 20 minutes, there's been considerable action up here.
Charles Collingwood describing the German surrender.
General Jodl said in a voice that choked and almost broke, "With this signature, the German people and the German armed forces are, for better or worse, delivered into the victor's hands. In this war, which has lasted..."
H.V. Kaltenborn speculating about a third term for FDR.
Good evening, everybody. There has been a contest of wits between the President of the United States and the Washington reporters. They have sought to make him tell what he intends to do about a third term. He has sought...
Eric Sevareid recalling the fall of France.
The life just simply ran out of the city. It was like a beautiful woman lying in a coma, with the lifeblood just draining out from every vein, every street. I noticed a one-way...
Those are the voices of CBS Radio News, Studio 9. Those and others like Elmer Davis, William L. Shirer, John Daly, and Alan Jackson, who through the dark days of Hitler's march through Europe and World War II, through the 50s and now the 60s, brought the living history of the world through Studio 9 and into the living rooms of the nation. Tonight they bid farewell to Studio 9.
Farewell to Studio 9, an affectionate goodbye to the birthplace of CBS News. Here is CBS News correspondent Robert Trout.
I am speaking to you from Studio 9. As broadcasting facilities go, this one is not remarkable at all. It's just a soundproofed room, 15 by 20, surrounded on two sides by glass-encased control rooms. On the third, it looks out into the clutter of the CBS newsroom. It's not the handsomest radio studio, not the most modern, not lovely at all. But for those who have worked here, it has a charm all its own. We shall miss it.
The living history of the world, indeed. Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report is next.